DNA Video Productions is a full-service video producer with a fleet of drones, 4K, and HD cameras, as well as a crew of video operators. We handle commercial and residential real estate videos, as well as events for promotional purposes. We create book trailers, both live-action and running stills, music videos, and website videos. We also film series shorts for online distribution and are currently involved in filming a political parody. We specialize in low-cost movie making. Call DNA Video Productions at 941-748-6865 or visit our website at www.dnavideoproductions.com. That's www.dnavideoproductions.com. Thank you. Our sponsor this month is Published, an affiliate of Village Voices. Published offers all author services from writing tips, critiques, manuscript evaluations, and editing, as well as tips to help you become published. If you prefer to self-publish, purchase the step-by-step book on publishing through Amazon, or purchase services a la carte, from formatting to creating custom covers, or even tips to gather endorsements. The staff is headed by 2 professional writers. After your books are published, either trade paper, electronically, or both, purchase marketing tips, web services, book trailers, or turn your book into an audiobook. Publish provides all your writing, publishing, and marketing needs. So give them a call at 941-748-6865. Contact them online at dgould497@aol.com or go to the website at www.publishedavillagevoices.webs.com. The intro you just heard was by Al Musitano. Good afternoon. Welcome to Culture Coast. Today we're going to be interviewing Ken Altergott, and he is the creator and writer of Tales from the Rivers, which is a story of his adventure following in the footsteps of Lewis and Clark on their official Bicentennial tour 200 years after Lewis and Clark went on their journey from the East Coast to the West Coast. And I'm going to make this a 2-part show because Ken has so much information to share that we're going to wind it down at the end of this show, and then I will have him back again next week. Welcome, Ken. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm glad you invited me to sit down and speak with you.
This is going to be a lot of fun because I have read your book, and it is an adventure of a lifetime. There's no doubt about it. Have you ever been a writer in your whole life?
No, I have not. I've never written anything. I never even thought of writing anything. As a matter of fact, it took me almost 8-9 years to start the book that we're talking about.
Okay. So you are not a writer, but you hired someone to do the editing for your book. So I'm going to go into that for a little bit because Culture Coast is about artists, and you are not an artist. You created this journal of your adventures, but you're such a social person that you just the love that you have for this whole thing, your passion for it, and the path that you took are so obvious that that's why I really wanted you on here. So you're not a crafts person that learned all about writing to write this book. You have this wonderful story to tell and this adventure that you wrote the notes for while you were on your journey. So tell me a little bit about, were you young when you started this journey?
No, I turned 65 years of age in April of 2003, and 2003 is when the actual journey began. But I had belonged to the group about 3 years previous, helping build the boats and raise money and help with building of the fort.
Okay, so how did that happen? You're working, what kind of work were you doing?
Well, I retired from the Wisconsin Telephone Company in 1985, and so I did different things along the way to keep myself occupied. And one of the, being a retiree, AT&T would send out a newsletter, and in the back of the newsletter they featured somebody doing something. It was questioned, what are they doing now? And it covered this Lewis and Clark expedition out of St. Charles, Missouri, and that they were going to build some boats and they were going to take this trip. And because I love history and I love boating, I got in touch with the fellow that was pictured on there. And
so this was in an AT&T. You worked for AT&T for most of your life.
30 years.
Okay, 30 years. And so you get their flyer. Now, who, you said, where are they now? Who was it that article was about? Was it somebody else that worked at AT&T?
It was about Harry Winland, who was from Missouri, from the St. Charles area. And he already had his uniform, and he was featured with a picture in the back page of it. And that's basically what I...
So was he the person who started this all?
No, the guy that started this all about 15 or 20 years before about 10 years before I got there, was Glenn Bishop. And he built the original keelboat. We'll get into this, I'm sure. He built the original keelboat. It took him 10 years. He built it by himself. And after they took the first trip on up to St. Joe, Missouri, they brought it back, and it burned up in a fire 2 weeks after they put it in the shed. And so the people in town felt bad about it, and they started talking, and one thing led to another, and all of a sudden they decided to rebuild the keelboat that had burned up and two other boats about 40 feet in length to do the reenactment starting in 2003, like Lewis and Clark did in 1803.
When Glenn Bishop originally built his keelboat, he wasn't considering this whole journey, was he, at that time? Was he thinking when he built the boat that he wanted to do the entire journey in 2003?
I can't. I don't really know. I don't think. I think that this developed with the guys that were working with him, because a lot of guys volunteered their time to help him out. And I think as they were working on it, one thing led to another. And one guy brought it up one time we were working that, hey, the Centennial's coming up. Maybe we should apply to try to do it. And that's what happened. And all of a sudden, after the boats were built, the Department of the Interior got a hold. He got a hold of them, and they said they would sponsor it. And it just
so everything just fell into place.
It just kept snowballing. It just kept going and going and going and going.
So it became a government-sponsored tour.
Yes, they picked our group because we had the three boats that are exact replicas of what Lewis and Clark had, and we had all the uniforms and all the tents and all that kind of stuff that we had partial of it. We got more and more as a group got
and
bigger.
Nothing was factory made. It was all handmade, just like in the old days.
The boats were handmade, using the blueprints that Lewis and Clark, the Navy government, had drawn up in started in 1802. I'm going to say, but no, the tents. We bought the tents because they were exactly like Lewis and Clark's. The manufacturer did. Our uniforms were purchased. Some of the equipment, some of the hats, and some of the accoutrements and knives and things we accumulated ourselves. But anything with cloth, I'm going to say, came out of a distributor that we all bought from the same guy, so we had the same looking uniforms and we all looked the same at all times.
Okay, and their uniforms do not look anything like the military uniforms of today.
No, they don't. And I don't know with this interview, but I just got one thing to say, is that when you see me or one of our group with our uniforms on, they have real big baggy pants in the back end, extremely baggy. And the question was, why is it baggy like that? Is because they never wore no underwear, and of course they don't want to get soiled, so they had these big baggy pants. That's just a little.
And they were all white.
They were all pure white because the government would not pay the money to have the clothes dyed. So these soldiers were slopping around in the river with white clothes on. I mean, totally white. So it was.
And they got dirty fast.
Oh, I mean, Even today, when we're doing a show or something and we're very careful to keep clean, we get dirty. Within 3 days, it looks like you've been rolling around in the dirt because no matter what you touch on the river, it's dirty and muddy. And it's dry, but it's dust. As soon as you get it wet, it turns back to mud. So we're always
dirty.
We got to the point that we tried to keep ourselves halfway clean, but we got to the point that this is probably the way Lewis and Clark really, really looked. So we looked dirty at times. Pretty bad.
All right. So you talked to Glenn Bishop and you ended up getting involved. Did you first talk to the gentleman in the newsletter, the AT&T?
I called Harry Whitland that evening after I got through reading it, and he sent me the application forms, which went to our secretary at that time, and then they processed my papers, and I sent them the check. And it's very cheap. It was $25. It's still $25 a year to belong to it, and all that covers is the paperwork.
That just covers the application and belonging. Now, this is just one of many Lewis and Clark reenactment groups, right? I mean, that was something that you ran into too. There's all over the country.
There aren't that many. I'll tell you this: we started, in around the Pittsburgh area, and we don't really run into heavy Lewis and Clark things until we get to Missouri and around Alton, Illinois. There's a great big museum there, and they have a few guys that dress up and work in that museum. But when you get out west, that's all they have out west is the Lewis and Clark thing. The West was not developed till after the Civil War. And this happened in 1803, 4, and 5. So that's all they have. So once you get out there, every town has got a small contingent of Lewis and Clark reenactors, which we always included when we got there.
So they can't reenact the Civil War because it wasn't any part of their history.
And it never
so they get into
there.
the Lewis and Clark thing
Right.
rather because that's really all they've got as far as early times
Right.
reenacting something.
I'm going to say this. I think that before out west, we'll call it, when the railroads were built and they built to Montgomery Point, when they got the two railroads together, east and west, that's when their history really started, which was not much out west. That railroad's about it, and then cattle drives. So we all know that. But for some reason, they really hung on to this Lewis and Clark thing because they're all over. I mean, they're like I said, every city
from St. Louis all the way.
Yeah, all the way, any major city,
all the way to Seattle, almost.
Chamberlain, and they're just all the way out to the coast. And even the Columbia River area is very heavy with Lewis and Clark.
So that's interesting too. And okay, so now we will go back to you decided you're joining the crew. How much time did you need to devote? Did you go to Pittsburgh and stay there? How did that work? Because you live in Wisconsin.
No,
Florida.
that was a sad part for me, is because it's a 9-hour drive from where I live to St. Charles, Missouri, where the action is. We'll call it where our hometown.
Oh, is that where they started building the boat?
Yeah, right in the parking lot where the museum stands today is where they started. So I would drive there and spend maybe 3 or 4 days, or whatever I could afford time-wise, and work on the boats and work on things. And then I would go back. And when I was there, then I would also find out what kind of equipment I was going to have to buy. So when the big push came, the big push I refer to as starting in 03, by the way. That's when I say big push.
Once you guys decided that this is what you were going to do,
Yeah.
all of a sudden you had a time deadline.
Right. And we had to get special hats made and things like that. So, but it's just my time. What we required of us is that we had to pick a person that we would portray. And we had to know everything about that person that was possibly ever printed about him. So if we were asked a question by a visitor in our camp, who do you portray? I portrayed Alexander Hamilton Willard. I knew his life story from the time that he got into the service until the time he died out in California. So I could tell you all about him. Well, not much about him because those days they didn't keep my records, but I know I would lose Willard. But I sort of drifted away from actually playing Willard or portraying Willard, is because when I was picked to be the captain of the keelboat, he was assistant blacksmith, and so I never got into our camp to be the assistant blacksmith like he was, So you kind of adjusted history a little bit to do that. I had to change. Well, yeah, I had to change my idea of who I was going to portray after I got to be the captain and pilot of the keelboat, because all of my time was devoted to that. I could not really participate in the camp life
and the blacksmithing
and
those
and
kind
stuff
of
like
things.
that. Yeah. Now get this, blacksmith. We had a real blacksmith, and he had white clothes on too.
And there was a reason they were called blacksmith, right?
Oh, there was a reason. I mean, his name was Aubrey Williams, and he was a teacher to college blacksmithing. And so in the morning he'd look halfway decent. By noon it looked like he was rolling around in a coal bin. But that's just the way it was. The dust was flying, and basically that's how I got into it.
So you drove down to St. Charles.
St. Charles, that's a home.
Regularly in the beginning years before the actual journey started. And at some point y'all decided you were being sponsored by the Department of Interior.
Yes.
And that you were going to do this journey from the very beginning to the very end.
It actually started in the very beginning in February of 2003. We lined up on the roof of Jefferson's memorial or his home when they announced that we were going to do this. And it was like about 12 below zero and the wind was blowing. We were standing on the roof.
And where was this in?
At Monticello.
Monticello, which is in Virginia?
Yes, that was Jefferson's home.
And it was what degrees in Monticello?
12 below zero that day.
In Virginia, wow.
The wind was blowing like crazy, and we were standing on the roof. And when they announced that we fired our flintlock rifles, it got off that roof in a hurry because we were freezing to death up there.
And you're from Wisconsin,
yeah,
so
it was cold.
I'll bet. That was your official announcement that you were going to be taking this on, because Jefferson is the one who originally ordered this journey.
He applied for the money for the Congress, and
to investigate their new purchase.
Yes.
So, and at first the Congress thought that this was a terrible purchase.
They thought it was terrible about buying the Louisiana. First of all, they were surprised that we even got the thing, because they were the two guys that went down there. I can't remember their names right now offhand, but they went down just to buy New Orleans because they wanted to control the mouth of the Mississippi River. And Napoleon Bonaparte was just going to start a war with England. He needed money for his troops and for supplies, so he offered it to these guys, the whole thing, at one clip, and it cost them maybe a third more than they wanted to pay for New Orleans alone. But they didn't even consult it back with Washington. They just they signed the lease and they bought the assignment. That's how we got it. And so Jefferson, we had to find out what we bought, and they applied for $1,500 to do this trip. But as it got bigger and bigger, I think it finally cost our United States government like $4,200 back in
to take a trip from Pittsburgh all the way
to West Coast and back.
And they were looking for a path to the Pacific.
The Northwest Passage. They hoped that there was a way to go from the East Coast to the West Coast totally by water.
Which was a major failure.
A major failure. I mean, if we get into it later on as the next story as we go, I'll explain how terrible it was.
So your adventure began. You were accepted in, and you started with the boats and the uniforms. And how did your wife take this?
Well, if she's going to listen to this,
she is.
She's a putzer, and so she did not mind that I was gone for some long periods of time. But she liked her flower garden, and she did just different things to keep herself busy. So she never really complained that I was gone on those long trips. And because I was sending back little tapes of what I was doing by the week, and then she would type that up and get that in the newspaper. So she was busy all the time.
So you were writing your journal and sending it to the newspaper for your weekly adventures. I
never had planned on writing a book. But the people in town that know me, and it's from a small town of 4,500, I know almost everybody. When they knew I was going to do this, they all wanted, let us know what you're doing. So the newspaper agreed to publish it every week, a story every week. So every week, a week back, they would get this tape, and Joanne would type it and send it to the newspaper, take it in there, and so.
And that's basically how you wrote your book too, was by talking about it, and then you got edited.
Right.
So it was basically the same setup. You told the story, and then it would get typed up. So that's how the book came about.
There was two different ways. So I would have a tape recorder, a small tape recorder. Instead of writing it down, because I'm a terrible writer, by the way, I would put snippets, what I call a snippet, in this tape recorder, and every day. And then once a week, then I would take on the second recorder, and I would listen to the snippets, and then I would elaborate on the other tape, which I sent to Wisconsin.
Very cool.
And so the snippets I still use when I wrote the book, because I got a very good memory. And I saw 4 deer today.
They were prompts.
And
They were prompts for you for what happened
Right.
that day to bring you back there, so that you were
I
able
would
to
elaborate.
expound on it.
I would elaborate on my little snippets that I had on the tape recorder. I would elaborate on that, and that's basically how the book. It was 16 hours, approximately 16 hours of snippets that I heard and then typed.
So
had
this
the book
went,
typed.
and so this whole trip, it came about because Glenn Bishop wanted to build the keelboat, and then it was replaced, and people started talking about, hey, this would be fun to recreate the trip. And then the Department of Interior got involved. It became at some point almost a business, did it not? Rather than just a hobby. I mean, you've got a foundation and presidents and secretaries and all of that now, right? For this group?
Yeah, it's a full-blown corporate. Well, it ain't corporate, but it's a full-blown
A nonprofit.
non-profit group. We have we got a president, we got a vice president, we got a secretary, a treasurer, we got 15 board members that control what we're doing, where the money is spent.
Wow.
So it's a very large organization.
It is an organization,
Right.
of a nonprofit organization that's rather large now. And you had a lot of people join up. Where did they all come from? How did they find out about this whole thing? Because you said over 300 people were off and on this journey with you.
We started this out, we had 265 men. This was a men's organization because they're all soldiers that went across the United States. So it's all men. It was 265 of us from 36 different states. To answer the question is that in 2001, we put in two of the boats at Pittsburgh. We came down the Ohio River and we stopped at all the towns dressed up and portrayed what we were going to do when the big push started. People would join up at the picnic tables and they would pay their money right then and there. Then we told them what they had to do to belong with us. So we picked up all these people going down the Ohio River and up the Mississippi River.
How did they hear that you guys were even going to be there? Was it in
We had
newspapers?
we had a wonderful PR man that went ahead. Well, first of all, to go backwards, is that anytime we went to a city, our people went there about 2 or 3 years ahead of time, knowing we were going to do this, and they found the parks that we were going to stay in. They found the tourism people, and we contacted with them that said, yes, you can come to our town. We were
So
glad
well
to have you.
organized.
And all that they had to furnish us was porta potties, hay for bales of hay to sit on, firewood, and water access.
Wow.
And so they knew 2 or 3 years ahead of time that we were coming. And so they kept it in their files, I suppose. But then our PR man would, about a week ahead of time, would call them and tell them we're on our way. And they would put it in newspapers. And we would
All
have
right,
2,000,
so it was
3,000
announced in
people.
newspapers.
Yeah.
This is before computers, really.
Yeah, right,
At
yeah.
the very, I shouldn't say before computers, but your trip occurred in 2003, started in 2003, and computers, we had them, but not like we do today.
When we were on the trail, basically, with the old "can you hear me now" thing, is that we had very poor reception a lot of times because the cell towers weren't around. So yeah, we started out in the infancy of what we have today.
Yes.
I mean, it was newspapers and going to the.
Even though it was only 15 years ago,
Yeah.
it was we were just at the beginning of our
the
digital
baby steps.
explosion.
Yeah, baby steps just started
So
now.
cell phones weren't in everybody's pockets. They were the big bricks back then,
Yeah.
weren't they?
A couple of guys had the new ones like we have today, but then you'd be going down the road and they holler, "Stop, stop." They got a tower or something, and then after that, we'd be up 2 days. It would always, so yeah,
Yeah.
It was tough.
So
When we were getting back
so
to it, it
communication.
was 265 guys, and that's how we recruited them. As we came through their cities, they would join up, and then when we came back, starting in 03, 04, they would come and go as we came to their cities.
Some
I
people
don't
would
know.
just take a vacation from their jobs,
Yeah.
and you had younger men too. And as you said, you didn't really have many women except in the background because they
That's
were
correct.
just assisting the group itself, not in
we
the...
had some of the women that would with their husbands, they would stay in motels, and we had about 3 people that had motorhomes, so their wives were with them. And what these people wives actually did was they had what we called the store, and we sold little trinkets and stuff, and to try to pay for it, get extra money and stuff because we were always running short. I was told that to move us was $1,000 a day
Wow.
when we were moving. So, when you start moving 90 days at a time, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the money was got by different organizations that donated us. A big company in St. Louis, Missouri. They gave us a lot of money, and a friend of mine gave us a lot of money.
You may mention sponsors. That's perfectly
Well, it was
okay.
Anheuser-Busch is the one that gave us a big chunk of money because we were only 30 miles from there. And some of the guys that worked there knew who to call, so they gave us some money. We just, everybody just gave us money.
They do, for a nonprofit organization like this, that would be a great thing for them.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had them as a sponsor, you had the Department of Interior as a sponsor, and you had other groups, so they were helping pay for all this, and so that you weren't out of your own pocket all the time buying your own food and things like that.
When we got to a city, again, the people that went there ahead of time, they would try to get as much money as they could. If some cities would give us $4,000 or $5,000 to be there, we were there 2 or 3 days. Some cities couldn't give us nothing. We would still stop, set our tents up, talk to all the school kids. If you paid or not, we always stopped at your city. So that's how it got. So we generated dollars as we moved down the river, or up the river, whichever we were going.
Very interesting, very interesting. Now, okay, so now it's time to start the journey. And you go to Pittsburgh is where it started?
Well, not real. The original keelboat was built in Elizabeth, Pennsylvania, which is 35 miles east of Pittsburgh. So because, I'm going to say this at this point, this trip was done exactly like Lewis and Clark did it, to the same day and sometimes at the same hour. So the first thing that we started with was Elizabeth, Pennsylvania, where the original keelboat was built in 1803. And the first thing that we did is that Johnny Walker, who was the boatwright builder, had an alcohol problem, and Lewis and him got into an argument in August.
Now this is 200 years
200 years to the day. And Johnny Walker's great-great-great-grandson portrayed his great-great-great-grandfather, and our Captain Lewis portrayed Lewis of Lewis Clark, and they had an argument in the Red Lion Bar about why this boat wasn't done. And we reenacted that. That was our first reenactment, and it started this whole 4-year journey. Whenever we could,
in Elizabeth,
Pennsylvania. Whenever we could, those things would happen.
So you tried to reenact everything that they did, where they did it, when they did it 200 years later.
And to the hour sometimes.
That's really cool. So I'm going to wrap this up for today, and we're going to get back on the second half of the journey next week. Thank you for being on Culture Coast and telling us about this wonderful adventure.
I'm glad to be here.
Nightmares. Frightful visions during the night, causing terror and loss of sleep. Daymares. Frightful visions during the day, causing fear and paranoia. Gothmares. Gothic visions that can happen anytime, causing horror and disgust. But sometimes they offer answers. Read Gothmares if you dare. Gothmares, a young adult novel by Al Musitano, available on Amazon and fine bookstores everywhere.
Village of the Arts, the largest artist colony in the state of Florida, located on 42 acres, includes artists, homes, galleries, gardens, and restaurants featuring handcrafted gifts, fine art sculptures, painting, photography, enviro art, healing arts, books, mystics, and musical variety. A few of the galleries are unique in their offerings. Village Voices specializes in books and art created exclusively by Florida residents. The Dancing Crane Gallery offers fine art, custom jewelry, and unique innovative art. The Village Mystic offers all things metaphysical: meditation, massage, mediums, aromatherapy, psychics, shamans, Reiki healing, and the gem mine, where you can mine for your own personal treasure. Yoga Arts offers classes or one-on-one coaching. Musicians and bands can be found throughout the area. Many of the artists and musicians offer classes. Restaurants and bakeries provide respite for the weary and magic for the foodies. Visit during the first Friday Art Walk and stroll through the shops and galleries enjoying free appetizers, wine, music, and demonstrations. For hours and information, please visit the website at www.villageofthearts.com.